Microplastics. Have you ever heard of them? I would wager that you likely have not, as they are a relatively new phenomenon in the scientific community. However, without you seeing them, they are slowly but surely polluting our planet and are currently responsible for harmful effects on the environment that could potentially get much worse in the future if humans don't do anything to stop their production. Let's take a second and step back to reflect on how much plastic you consume in a single day. Let me paint a picture for you as you wake up. You hear the alarm ring. You lean over and turn it off. It's a plastic alarm clock. You lean over and take a sip of water from your plastic bottle. Then it's time for you to clean yourself. Head over to the shower and you use shampoo and body wash coming from plastic bottles. You exfoliate with facial cleanser, which, believe it or not, already has manufactured microplastic inside of it. This is all within minutes of rising. Essentially, what I'm getting at is that in our modern society, plastic use is essential and plentiful. From every piece of plastic that exists, there are tens of thousands of particles of microplastics that will likely be released into the environment. I want to introduce to you the problematic yet inevitable existence of microplastic in our atmosphere and marine environments. We all know how weathering works. As objects on our planet exist, external forces and pressures break them down slowly over time. If you're like myself, you wouldn't pay mind to the day-to-day objects that you use in contributing to pollution. But if you think about it, every time you throw out a plastic water bottle or a wrapper from a candy bar, they are as vulnerable to weathering as any rock is outside. Microplastics form in two main ways. One is similar to the weathering I just described, and the other I have mentioned is a bit more surprising. They literally manufacture it, just like I mentioned with the exfoliating facial cleanser. So essentially, microplastic comes from two sources. Those that are manufactured purposely for particular industrial or domestic application, such as the exfoliating facial scrubs, toothpastes, and resin pellets used in plastic industry. Those are considered to be primary microplastics. Now, secondary microplastics are those formed from the breakdown of larger plastic items under ultraviolet radiation or mechanical abrasion, aka the weathering. So as a general rule of thumb, any tiny plastic particle smaller than 5 millimeters in size is considered a microplastic. As I mentioned, studies and publications on microplastics are relatively new, where most have come in the last 10 years. Essentially, we're learning the most right now. And off the limited research done on microplastics, there have been a few agreed upon conclusions. Microplastics are everywhere, in the air, sea, freshwater, and sediment. A good average is that there are about 100 particles per every cubic meter of air, although it can be much less or denser depending on the amount of pollution in the area. For example, there's going to be more microplastics in the air above London than there is in the middle of Montana. Also, microplastics come in different shapes, sizes, and colors. They're like snowflakes. Every single one is different, and that makes it very difficult to measure them and predict their effects. It is also agreed upon that there needs to be more cohesion between studies in order to cross-reference to build a greater knowledge of their presence and spread. And although they do have many negative effects on the environment, the overall effect is not super harmful just yet. There are positives from microplastics, although you have to be pretty nitpicky to find these. One study describes microplastics that are high up in the atmosphere that essentially act as tiny little mirrors which reflect the sun's heat away from the earth, thus cooling it. But I want to focus more on the negative effects of microplastics because it is agreed upon that in the future there will be more because, let's be honest, companies aren't going to just stop producing plastic, and that will just lead to more and more microplastics in the environment. We know that plastic films, or microplastics, have been shown to create channels for water movement, leading to increased water evaporation, and this would lead to soil drying, with potentially negative consequences for plant performance. Also, looking at marine life, given microplastic size, these microparticles can be ingested by a wide variety of species, either marine or freshwater environments. We know that sea turtles and other aquatic animals consume lots of microplastics. And the great amounts of buoyant plastics accumulated in sea turtles' guts may alter their swimming behavior and buoyancy control, which negatively influences the predatory activity and their capacity to avoid predators and human threats, such as ship strikes and fisheries. So microplastics are making it harder for turtles to swim like they normally do, and it's very damaging to them. Okay, so let's take a dive into the bigger picture issues of microplastics. Given the fact that they'll continue to pollute our environment, is it realistic to expect our world to change its habits for the greater good of the future? Looking at the recent history of negative trends of global warming and such, one might say no, but let me bring in my friend and colleague, Campbell Soup, who's quite knowledgeable on microplastics, to inquire her thoughts on the matter. Hi, Campbell. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, Michael. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you personally say you care about the environment and the future of our planet?
Well, I'm majoring in environmental sustainability, so I'd say it's pretty high up there, about a 10.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd say 10 out of 10.
You care the most out of...
I care the most.
Most possible.
Alright, I'd give it like an 8.
Okay,
I
call it...
still use plastic water bottles sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of all these things too. Yeah, it's kind of impossible to go to the grocery store and not pick up something with plastic.
I would agree. I would say that's a large issue in society.
Mm-hmm. Everything's packaged in plastic.
Legitimately. On the same scale, how would you rate those who can arguably create the largest impact? For example, like policymakers or owners of large corporations, like we can say Coca-Cola and Nestle are two that create the most plastic pollution. Would you say those people care more or less than you at like that 7-8 mark?
I'd say they care significantly less. I think a lot of big corporations actually try and like make the consumer feel like it's on them, when in reality it's the big corporations producing so much plastic, and they're trying to like switch it around and place the blame on the individual so that like you feel the guilt and they're not responsible.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
I'd agree with that. I mean, the issue that I see is that it's like a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're the ones buying their products, therefore supporting them with our wallets. And like you said, going to the grocery store, you can't go down an aisle and not see plastic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, sure, but like they could, like Coke was packaged in glass bottles at one point, which is significantly better, and it
tastes
could
better.
be again, and it tastes better. Yeah.
So, I mean, with that being said, is there a route to really take to find a solution to not only plastics but the microplastics that are just floating around literally everywhere?
The problem with it is if there is a solution, every single person has to be a part of it. And I think we're so far down the rabbit hole that it's kind of like, I think it's kind of getting to the point of impossible.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question of, could this all be a lost cause?
Yes and no. Again, it's like, if you think of it that way, then nothing's ever going to change. But if everybody like actually believed we could do something and make an impact, then there would be that possibility. I just don't know if I could ever see that happening.
Do you think you could see 60% of the world population turning the corner and voting and supporting sustainability?
I think by the time that happens, it's going to be too late. I mean, I'm hopeful. I hope that's not the case. I would like to change that around. That's why I'm, like, working in this right now. But currently, I think a lot of people are really set in their ways. Humans are selfish, naturally. And like I said, like, even people who are aware of it or like trying to make a difference, there's only so much you can do at a certain point.
I think the largest issue of it is the money aspect, and the world's economically driven, and that's where people migrate to. Those who have power and money want more power and money, and this to cut back on plastic production cuts into profits quite heavily. Therefore, I don't see it ever being solved.
Yeah.
How about on like the smallest level, like yourself? Do you ever see yourself changing any habits, daily habits, things you consume to try to combat this?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, even just something I noticed lately is they started putting out, like, compostable plastic bags, forks, knives, like, anything like that, which is great, because that's a super small thing you can do. I feel like once I'm living actually by myself, like, I'll be able to make the most changes, because, like, it's kind of a pain in the butt, but you could theoretically have a bunch of jars and go to, like, bulk stores and only purchase whole foods and everything, but, like, in society, it's kind of difficult. It's not readily made available. It's not convenient. So you really, really have to put in the effort if you want to create a lot less waste, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's, like, you mentioned the word convenience, and I think ever since plastic was invented in, like, around the 1950s and then started to be largely produced, the convenience for the manufacturer went through the roof. They started saving money. And then it's just honestly super convenient to just have in your house, given, like, you can microwave it, you can freeze it.
Yeah.
So in a world where, like, you can have stuff delivered to your door by clicking a button, to expect people to really put in, like, the efforts with the jars and all that stuff, like you said, it's
just not gonna happen. I remember my mom told me, like, when she was little, she remembers, like, how, like, when there wasn't plastic and then when everything became plastic, and her mom and dad were super about it. They were like, this is so easy, we could just throw stuff out, blah blah blah, and she was like, I don't get it. And then you grow up with it and it becomes normal.
What do they have before plastic? Like, just paper bags and paper, like, what do they even package stuff in? I mean, I don't even think they could possibly mass produce things without plastic. I think that's when that as a society, that's when that all changed.
Yeah, and even, like, processed foods and stuff, or, like, takeout from restaurants, like, that probably wasn't nearly as big of a thing.
I don't even think it was a thing.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, you had the milkman, and you'd come with the glass bottle, you'd return it the next day when you get your new one, and, like, that was a cycle.
Yeah, let's bring that back.
Yeah.
But I digress. Essentially, we are in agreement that microplastics and plastic use in general is a very slippery slope. It's going to take tremendous effort to revert our world back to a sustainable level, and I can only hope that we eventually turn the corner as a society, clean up the microplastics, and cut back on the production. With that being said, thank you for listening, and I hope you learned a thing or two about microplastics. On screen now are all of my sources. Thank you again.